The content from When Justice Goes AWOL podcast is for informational purposes only. Views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect those of our sponsors or employers. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy in content, information provided may not always be complete or current. Listeners rely on information at their own risk. Warning: this episode contains depictions of violent crime and other subjects of sensitive nature. Viewer discretion is advised. When Justice Goes AWOL podcast is not affiliated with the military. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me again today. My name is Nicole Charcoti, and this is When Justice Goes AWOL. Last week, we were looking at the case of the first trial that Jonathan Kingley should have been present for. We heard from the source that the mother of the victims cited multiple times that she tried to get him further restrained so that this eventuality would not happen. That mother did everything she could to make sure that the man who hurt her children faced the full consequences. It's too bad nobody else on that team did. But as far as the trial for Jonathan Kingley for the murder of Nick Hokema goes, how he was apprehended also plays a role into this situation. So they found Lee in a neighborhood in Redmond. They found the cab, actually, and it was very clear that it was the cab used in the murder of Nick Hokema. So they eventually track him down to a residence where they gave him a lawful order to surrender. He attempted to hide upstairs and actually jump out of a window. Just Van Damme his way out of this, I guess. Well, that didn't work, and he was being tackled by law enforcement that was apprehending him. He described trying to grab the officer's gun as, quote, furthering his escape. That just sounds to me like he was planning to use it to further his escape on other people. In this case, other officers. This could have gone down way worse than it already did. And of course, with any trial or with military court, there are motion hearings. And the motion hearing that stood out to me was one that actually happened in November 4th. And the following text exchange is between me and the victim's advocate in Nick's case, where I addressed some concerns about his defense team laughing and joking with him during one of these motion hearings before the judge was in the courtroom. I find it incredibly callous that they felt that was acceptable to do in front of the victim's family. We were just sitting in the courtroom or waiting for the judge to come in, and I look over because I hear like stifled or like soft giggling and laughter, and I look over to the defense table with Lee, and somebody says something and they all start giggling. Somebody says something else and he chuckles and they laugh, and in front of the victim's family, in front of us. So I stood up and said something about it. I said, I sure am glad that you guys are having such a wonderful time and can laugh about this, because this is one of the worst days of my life. So these were my concerns airing out for the victim's advocate. Just thank you. I hope you got a chance to talk to the defense team for him too. They're at a trial concerning Nick's murder. They might act like it's any other day, but my life has been destroyed. I don't appreciate them sitting there giggling about whatever's more amusing than a civilian being killed by their client. He was, of course, very, very understanding and frankly appalled by their behavior too, and he assured me, I have spoken to every person that has a role in the courtroom to ensure that we don't have that happen again. Lieutenant Colonel Fitz is going to speak directly with the defense team to ensure they're aware of their actions going forward. I mean, they could have been aware of their actions in the first place, but okay. I am really sorry it went that way today. I promise you that our team takes this very seriously. And I just assured him, I know you've been taking this seriously, and I haven't heard any of you make a joke about any of this. If it happens again, though, I'll really lose my I didn't want to go anymore until the actual trial. I'd seen enough. I knew that they didn't care. Another day for work for them. I would think morals and ethics would be something that you would follow if you held a position like defense counsel for a murderer. Don't laugh and joke with them in front of the victim's family. So the day of the trial, I get up. A friend of mine let me spend the night at their place, and another friend took us up north to JBLM for the trial at the Cascade Courtroom Complex. And we get to the courtroom and we're waiting for trial to start. And I just remember feeling sick. I was freezing. I was sweating. My dad gave me his leather jacket and I soaked that through. It kind of felt like my body was going through shock, but I was fighting it. As part of the plea agreement, he had to stand there and explain what happened that night, the night that he murdered Nick. Early morning hours of January 15th, 2024, Nick picked up Lee, and they ended up in the South Center Mall parking lot. I guess there was a disagreement over the distance that should be covered for a ride. He wanted to go to Redmond, but he was willing to work with people if they were genuinely struggling. I mean, he was willing to help people who needed to get to somewhere important, and he would do his best to get them as close as they could be, at least. Well, I guess Lee didn't agree with the amount on the ride, the amount the ride should have costed, so there was some money in Nick's center console. Less than $20. And Lee reaches into his window to get his money from the center console. There was some debate over whether Nick tried to drive away or if the vehicle began to roll because he took his foot off the brake. So the vehicle begins to roll, and Lee proceeded to... And then Lee murdered Nick. Nick's death certificate says that he was killed from sharp force injuries to his head and chest. Multiple sharp force injuries. But the main excuse was his parents were mean to him. His parents never really wanted him. They actually abandoned him once in the middle of nowhere, and he just felt like an unwanted child. That's why he murdered Nick. Which is weird because I've seen pictures of him with his parents, one at Christmas in particular. He doesn't look too distraught. His mom's actually hugging him. I've been told that his parents also send him money for commissary. How can you stand by somebody who did that to children and took somebody away from a family? I presented my testimony. I gave pictures to prosecution and pictures of us going out cooking together with the pets. I had more pictures of them in my phone than I did of me. Moments where we were happy. I told the story about the morning he didn't come home and everything I did to try and find him. I told him about all the places that I had called, and then I told him about the detective who let me know that he was gone forever. On a quick side note, I just want to say how wonderful investigation was. There were several times I took my anger out on them, but they were nothing but understanding and supportive, and I just really appreciated that. His family and I talked about his loss, all the joy and just comfort and just the love that he brought to people and the people that he kept in his life and just even the people he talked to on rides. Like, he cared. He cared about his city and everybody in it and the people, and our home wasn't the same after losing him, and the only time I ever went back was to get the pets and bring them back to where I was staying. But if it hadn't been for my amazing friends and family, I wouldn't have gotten any of that stuff out of the apartment. They helped me, and their love got me through so much. I tried to go into the apartment a second time, but it was like I saw him everywhere. I still pass by certain areas in our old neighborhood, and I can see us walking our dog or picking blackberries on the side of the road where there were big bushes, or going to the park. It was like I was looking at his ghost. As a result of losing Nick, one of the other things that happened was later that September, I tried to asphyxiate myself in my parents' garage. And as a result of that, I was put into a psychiatric medical wing of the local hospital. The trial just took up so much of my life. Now, during this trial, Lee's allowed to have character witnesses, but just with the panel that they had, you could definitely tell that they were grasping for straws at one point. Probably throughout the whole thing, as soon as they found out what Lee had done, nobody was willing to vouch for him, but there were some people who were foolish enough to. 3 of the character witnesses, in particular to me, stood out. So one witness was a quote-unquote friend of Lee, I guess, who actually almost perjured himself during his testimony. He was talking about finding out that Lee had been charged with these crimes, and I guess they asked him if, he could believe any of it or if they thought it was true, and his testimony did not match up with what he said on the stand. During his testimony on the stand, he talked about, oh yeah, I can't ever seeing something like that, but, I just never pictured that of him. And the prosecution stood up and said, objection, Your Honor, and they asked on what grounds, and he said perjury. You ever see in somebody's facial expression like their butt clench because they know that they might go to prison too? Well, he corrected himself pretty quick after that, saying he misrecalled, and kind of a crummy way to cover up the fact that you're now changing your testimony to better suit your quote-unquote friend. And then there was, it would have been better if this guy just didn't show up. They bring this one guy in, and if you're going to show up for court in a t-shirt, at least make sure the t-shirt's clean. I saw so many stains, it's almost like he was wearing a map. Map of Greece, and it kind of looked like a map of Greece and what looked like mustard, but who can be sure? Anyway, this composed gentleman said that he didn't believe in the validity of the first charges, which goes back into the testimony of my source, where they were saying, oh yeah, the mom's just making it up to get back at him. That's all this is, and I'm sure he's not capable of this. But the one that really, it irritated me, because I majored in psychology, and while I am not currently practicing with that, I know the basics. Like, I like to think that there are basics for human behavior, with one of them being the best predictor of future behavior is the past behavior. This psychological expert witness, she talked about all these programs that would help him in lieu of incarceration. There's treatment for him. He can go back into society that way, and the only problem is she never evaluated him, or they said she never evaluated him. She claimed these programs have a high success rate and would benefit Lee in the long run. Just total disassociation from the problem and covering it with a blanket statement of, oh, it would do more better than it would harm if we did treatment for pedophiles instead of punishment. But even worse than the texts and everything else that went along with his defense's representation of him, when it came time to sentencing and figuring out if he was due any time credited, defense argued that he should have time served credited for pretrial confinement. It made me furious and absolutely sick to hear them try to use the same policy that would have kept Nick alive to benefit their client. We didn't use it then, so let's use it now. They argued that technically, since Lee was incarcerated for this crime before leading up to trial, it served as pretrial confinement. The judge wasn't hearing any of that. She kindly reminded them that he is actually in post-trial confinement for his first set of crimes that he went AWOL over, and he was convicted in absentia. But nope, the defense says, well, it was technically pretrial, so he should receive so many hundreds of days credited because he has that option. Now, while the judge did not honor any of that, I think it's interesting that they felt like that was an acceptable thing to bring up, considering how Nick was murdered. Considering, all the predetermining factors that should have been taken into account with this case. It's sad that no explanation that they have given me will ever be good enough for why Nick is dead. Because this never should have been allowed to happen. He was facing 64 years for his first set of crimes. And I've looked into pretrial policy for those years when he was charged. But then two-party state laws became an issue because two-party state laws require that everybody has a reasonable expectation of privacy, but I think they should change it to everybody should have a reasonable expectation of privacy, except in cases where children are assaulted. Subchapter that, if you will. I think if you serve in the military, it should always be military court-martial. If they pride themselves on punishing the offenders better than they could in civilian court, which was the argument for why they took the case out of Pierce County, by the way. So Mary Robnett was the prosecuting attorney who dismissed the charges and handed Lee's case over to the military in 2022. See, this is long before the laws on pretrial confinement actually changed. Mary Robnett, a prosecuting attorney for Pierce County, decides to hand the case over to the military because the military is better situated to handle this case, as some of the alleged abuse might have happened outside the state of Washington, she wrote. Abuse might have occurred in Georgia, which is a one-party state. I'm surprised that they chose not to use that phone call where he freely admitted to what he had done, and the mother couldn't get a hold of CID in the first place, so how is any of that her fault? She recorded the conversation because she got definitive proof that he admitted to these crimes.
And so the CID agent had told me if he calls you back, call me first and then call him so that we can do a three-way and I can have it recorded. I tried calling the CID agent back. He was calling me a million times, so I just had to answer the call and record the call myself at that point.
They didn't end up using that phone call where he admitted to what he did to those children anyway. If they had, a lot more would have been considered. There are certain requirements to put someone or be able to put someone in pretrial confinement. But I've read through them and every one of those little boxes was checked with every concern that the victim's family raised to the military before Nick was murdered. So the first one is the offense committed was serious enough to be sent to court-martial, which it was. He assaulted children in the worst way that effects that they'll have to carry with them for the rest of their life. Hopefully, if they have the support and the right resources, they will be able to work through it. But you can never make what happened to them go away. The second qualification is if he's a flight risk. From what I understand, he has family in Korea. His spouse at the time said that, yeah, you should put him in pretrial confinement. You have to put him in pretrial confinement because I have known him in this kind of response. He's more flight than fight, and he will not stick around for this. Or the third qualification being that restraint is required by circumstances. I just find it odd that when you have articles like, there's an article from Texas ProPublica where they talk about the rates of pretrial confinement being used more for drug crimes than they are sex crimes. Now, I understand drugs are awful. Drugs destroy families, they destroy lives, but so does child SA. It destroys your sense of well-being, it destroys your sense of safety, it destroys your sense of self, that someone can just use you and get away with it like that.
Basically, the excuse was him being deployed and just coming back and And he promised to make it up to me. He wouldn't do it again. He doesn't know why he did it, and that he'd be coming. Let's just talk it out.
Pretrial confinement is finally the last form of restraint. And that is actual physical restraint. Actually putting someone in confinement, maybe a day before trial, just to make sure they show up. Pretrial confinement, it says, is required in circumstances if it is foreseeable that a person won't appear at trial. Because with the runaround he was giving his victim's family, you can't trust him to be consistent. It's a system of merit, and they have absolutely none. I am not referring to the men and women who willingly risk their lives to protect their country and civilians, because that is what makes up a country, is our civil. You can't have an army without civilians. And I have heard so many justifications from people saying, well, that's the law. That's just the way the law is. I mean, it's the world we live in. Because I think this could be handled so much better. And I can look at the justifications they have for why it wasn't. Military law may have been changed, but a lot of the problems still remain. A lot of the problems still remain with the same military bases, the same units, and even the same commanders. Thankfully, though, nobody died this time. The same mistakes just keep getting repeated, and more people will go AWOL as long as they feel they can. I appreciate you listening to my story on Nick. If I could say anything to him right now, it's that I've never stopped thinking about you. He is my driving force to always do what is right, despite it being unpopular opinion. I don't want anyone else to feel the pain that Nick's family or my family or anyone that treasured and valued him. I never want them to feel that kind of pain because they lose somebody too. Under the same circumstances where the same precautions could have been used, but they weren't. Be sure to tune in next week where we look at another case with the 201st EMIB, the Expeditionary Military Intelligence Brigade. The same brigade that Lee belonged to, with the same commander, David Charles Hazelton. Instead of taking to heart the lessons and mistakes that were learned, especially concerning Lee's 2 cases, the second one which shouldn't even have occurred, we will be looking at how they let this man go AWOL as well. I'm Nicole Charcoti. Take care of yourselves out there.